Alright, hi and welcome everyone to this brief overview video on some of the resources available to you in case you want to really emphasize with your students aspects of academic dishonesty, plagiarism, issues of tolerance, issues related to student conduct in your GE or online class at Lake Tahoe Community College. So very recently I sent to all the full-time faculty, part-time faculty on our current spring 2019 teaching list, as well as administrators, a class URL that basically should take you to this site. That site assumes that you are already part of what's called the LTCC Canvas and Online Users Group. If you're not a part of that, if you try to click on the link, and I will share that initial link with you here so you can check it out. I also will put it below on the YouTube page so you can just click there. It's a little easier than having to type it in just looking at my video here. If you're not able to do that, then I'll show you this second link, and that's a self-enrollment link that should allow you just to immediately enroll in this class based on the settings that actually Treva Thomas set up. And just to clarify, Treva Thomas is our full-time DE coordinator at LTCC. She's done a great job setting up a lot of these resources. My name's Scott Lucas. I teach full-time anthropology, sociology. I'm also the academic senate president, and I'm taking over in a temporary role for spring 2019 only, working on the DE coordination. So any questions you have, you certainly can send them to me here at the college. So once you're available to get in this class, you'll have what you need. And I should say that kind of like with a lot of other Canvas classes, one place to start is with your modules. I think you probably know that from your own class. And the modules have all sorts of handy resources here. And this is quite useful actually, aside from the stuff we'll be talking about today. So if you want to know about accessibility, you can look at this tab. If you want to know about dates and how to adjust them, all the Canvas resources. And by the way, if you're ever looking for anything, you can go to the help page as well on Canvas and get that information available there. So this has a lot of good information, including videos talking about all the resources out there. If you want to do any virtual meetings through Confer Now and Zoom, there's information there and so forth. I won't go through all these. Class resources, very useful here. Everything from grading to netiquette. And one of the things I want to emphasize is what's cool about teaching online at LTCC is a lot of the stuff is already set up. It's just a matter of finding the resource and then importing it into your class. So as an example, you can click on net etiquette, and this has some good information about what net etiquette is and why it's important and so forth. Any of this information that you find here on this main Canvas LTCC and online users group, you can certainly use in your online class to make it more accessible, to make it more interactive in terms of working with students. I will, by the way, in the future have some additional videos that will talk about things like interactivity and videos and creating new resources for your Canvas class. So just be on the lookout for those. But let me right now scroll all the way to the bottom, and you will find what I set up here is something called DE Resources. Click on this, it says Main Page. And as you can see here, I set this up. There's not a lot of information here, but this will give you the bare bones of likely what you need to access if you're concerned about communicating things to your students that include academic dishonesty and plagiarism, student code of conduct, and so forth. If you ever want the entire list of board policies and administrative procedures, you can click on this. This will take you to the LTCC website, and this has information relative to everything at the college. I think probably the area you might want to click on if you're interested would be academic affairs. There's a lot of information here, and what I tried to do was call and collect some of the information that might be relevant to your online class. Obviously, things like nursing programs or graduation requirements for degrees and certificates may not be completely vital to what you're teaching here at the college, but it's available in case you want that. So again, access that by clicking on the entire list here, which is an external URL. The other four, I think, are probably a little more relevant to what you're doing in your class. The first one relates to academic dishonesty and plagiarism. The next one is general student conduct standards at the college and procedures for dealing with challenging students, statement on diversity, and then academic freedom. So let's begin with the first one. So click on this. And this is the LTCC Academic Dishonesty and Plagiarism Policy. And years ago, actually, I was on a committee, and I was the chair of that committee when we drafted this policy. And it really was in response to a lot of things we were seeing in social science and English classes. Quite a few of my colleagues, including Michael O'Loughlin, used to tell me stories about issues they were having in their in-person classes relative to cheating or plagiarism. Certainly, it doesn't happen with all of our students. Hopefully, it's a very small number of students at the college. I think the thing is, since we've shifted over the last, I've been teaching at the college for 20 years, over the last 10 years when our DE program got really strong at the college, we've noticed more and more issues of academic dishonesty and plagiarism coming up. Now, I should say off the bat, if you're teaching a class like I am and you have a quiz or an exam, unless you're setting up a proctoring service, as our mathematics faculty sometimes do, it's almost impossible, I think, to I don't want to say you can't police this, but if someone's taking a test in one of my online classes, they are actually taking it open book. There's just no way, short of having students sit in front of Zoom and having an empty desk and taking a test or something like that synchronously at the same time, there would be no way for really you to assess that. I think that the case is a lot of us do open book exams and quizzes. So my guess is for DE classes, plagiarism is not the stuff related to exam cheating and so forth, but it's more, or I should say academic dishonesty in our classes. It's not related to cheating on exams and quizzes, more related to plagiarism in papers. Could be discussion posts, could be anything that you find on the internet and you incorporate as part of could be a quiz question if you ask students to do something independent, or a research paper. We do have VeriCite available, and if you have some questions about VeriCite and how it's used, you can actually find those on the previous page. Just for the purposes of showing you where this is at, let's jump back 2 pages. And going back to all the resources that Treva set up previously, and you'll find it right here, VeriCite and Turnitin. We recently got a contract with VeriCite. We're talking about maybe moving back to Turnitin, but that's all really in play. It's, as you might imagine, something related to our size of institution and the cost of those services. So kind of keep that on hold. We're not entirely sure what's going to happen yet, but we will have some service available even if we're no longer going to have VeriCite. But this has all the information about setting up a unique assignment in VeriCite such that you can have the work of students checked for plagiarism across a numerous slew of databases and resources on the internet. So very important potentially from the prevention standpoint. Let's go back to the main page and I'll just show you that policy. And what I'm trying to suggest with all of these policies here is you can do one of 2 things. I think if you want to incorporate this, maybe 3 things. So you could certainly just select all, hit on your keyboard Command A and then Command C. And then you could just create this, put this in your own page. Very easy to do. I think it should keep the formatting if you want to do it that way. You should also be able to, since you're part of this class, you should be able to go to your settings page and click on Import. You can then import, do a search for this class, which would be LTCC Canvas. I believe if you just type like those first few characters, it should come up. And then when you do the import, select, they should come up as wiki pages. I believe there are 4 wiki pages. And then that will allow you just to select those, import them into your Canvas shell. What Canvas typically will do in this case, depending on if you import it as a module, the one main module, or as pages, which is here, you could then, in your own shell, go back to modules, create a new module if you like for that, put it on your syllabus. Can't really say, right, because it does depend on how you set up your class. But the point is, you don't necessarily even have to cut and paste, and you certainly don't have to retype all this. That's why I set up the resources for you to use. So this, again, you could use this policy. This is officially from the catalog on pages 44 to 45. Go all the way to the bottom. I created some PDFs. And that actually is just downloading. I won't open it up, but it downloaded to the computer. And in this case, I can actually preview the entire document, which is pretty cool. And it's available here, as you can see. We can zoom out a little bit and see the entire document. And it's over 2 pages. It talks in the first page about what is defined as academic dishonesty and plagiarism. The second page is enforcement, what can happen to the student. I should say in the second part of this video, first part I'm laying out resources. Second part of the video, I'll talk about some tips I would offer to you. And I've been teaching, by the way, online at LTCC, I believe longer than anyone since 2004, the summer of 2004. So I've been through a lot of issues. I've done academic research, published peer-reviewed articles and chapters of books on online education. So I'm happy to share some of those tips with you this quarter as I'm working in this capacity, backfilling Treva as she is on professional leave. So this gives you the entirety of the policy. Again, however you want to incorporate this in your class page, do it. But I really want to stress in this video, you should have one or more of these included. It should be in every single Canvas shell here at LTCC. I want to make a statement that I think this is a growing issue, a growing concern in online classes, issues of plagiarism and academic dishonesty. One way to deal with that is to have very clear communication with all of our students in every single one of our classes that we don't tolerate these sorts of violations. And if we do a good job of communicating that in our classes, I think we're all going to be better for that. So it's a little my soapbox pitch to you today, I guess I would say, but I think it's something really important. So that's issue 1, cheating, academic dishonesty, plagiarism. Let me jump to this bottom one. I think it's a little less relevant. This bottom one is just a statement on academic freedom. It's important, certainly, and you can see where it comes from in our, this is one of our board policies. And it's just talking about academic freedom and responsibilities are inseparable. It's about the right of instructors to teach and conduct research and communicate their knowledge to the community openly, honestly, and without interference. So this is a general statement that really, I think, solidifies what the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, have said about things like academic freedom, tenure, and so forth. So that one is probably not as vital to include with your students. They may be interested in that, but that's just maybe for your general knowledge as an instructor here at LTCC. The next two I think are quite relevant, so I would say these go hand in hand. So the first one is a faculty statement on tolerance and diversity. And recently in the Academic Senate meeting we talked about this, and this was something that was passed a few years back, and it talks about free speech is at the core of our college, and we will not tolerate racist, sexist, homophobic, or any other form of discriminatory language or behavior. Hate speech as defined, hate speech and other such language or behavior as defined in the LTCC Board Policy 5500 will result in disciplinary sanctions and actions. So I think this is important just to know that guess what? If you teach a class that is controversial, and I'm thinking here of my social science faculty colleagues. In fact, I've heard some issues in a few classes. I've had some issues in classes. Hypothetically, I have a situation, you're teaching a religion class, and you have some students in the class who are from a particular religion, and they have a very strong viewpoint about a particular issue, like gay marriage, or some other political issue, or some other lifestyle or cultural issue. What happens then is you might have a discussion that is, say, focused on this particular issue. This usually doesn't come up on exams. You have an open discussion, and in that open discussion, you certainly do want free speech, and you want tolerance and diversity expressed. But what happens when a student engages in something that is close to hate speech, or discriminatory speech, or speech that strikes you as aggressive because it's impinging on the rights of other students in that class who indeed may represent some of those viewpoints that that particular student is against or is speaking out about in a discussion post. So I think this is an important statement. You may want to include it. You can reference the numbers. You could, again, link to this. You can cut and paste it, however you want to do that. So that's, I think, part one, is to say something about free speech and diversity. Now, if you teach a class where, I don't want to say it's nuts and bolts, but if it's something that is really focused on issues independent of any sort of political, cultural, social, gender, racial, ethnic controversy, then some of this stuff may be just very boilerplate. In other words, you put it in your syllabus, it's there to back yourself up. And I will say, I've been on a few grade dispute panels and student complaint panels. One of the things you want to do, and I'll talk about this probably in a later video, is to really back yourself up. Make sure your syllabus, your Canvas shell, just like you'd have an in-person class and a physical syllabus, a printed syllabus, make sure you have everything represented on this page, because if there is a dispute, if something comes up in some procedure down the road in terms of a panel, it's just important to have the backup to show that you've expressed this to the students. If you had a dispute, let's say, related to two students in the class, and I teach a number of these classes, gender and race, and if the two students disagreed, and you didn't lay this out clearly somewhere on your site for the students, through an announcement, hopefully on your syllabus, hopefully in the modules, then when that dispute takes place, we have nothing to base the dispute on, essentially. We can have a conversation with those students, but we won't maybe be able to resolve it, because what'll be lacking is some of this foundation that clearly states your position as an instructor at the college in terms of these controversial issues. A little bit of a speech there, but I just want to state that because I think it's very important if ever you do have a situation arising where there is a complaint related to your class, particularly if there are political or controversial issues being discussed. Could even happen, I'm thinking, in a science class. I saw a video recently on flat earthers, and interesting Netflix documentary you might just check out if you're interested in this sort of topic. I'm actually probably using a little bit of that in my Deviance class this quarter, my Social 104 class I'm teaching. But that's an example of something. If you had someone in a class who believes in a position that is radically different or challenges what you're teaching, how are you as an instructor going to maintain calm and order and tolerance in that class? If you don't have anything set up, if you don't have statements, if you don't have principles, if you don't have foundations, I think it's going to be very hard and you could quickly lose control of that class. So let's look at one more area related to this, and that's the student conduct standards. Very, very, very lengthy. I basically cut and pasted this from the college catalog, pages 45 and 46. And this is very lengthy. I won't go through this all. It has everything from, controlled substances, robbery or extortion, sexual harassment, cheating and plagiarism. It covers every possible violation. And by the way, when we communicate this, I don't think we're necessarily being punitive, but we're backing ourselves up and we're protecting the majority of the students in our classes who do not engage in these sort of activities or behaviors. So you can look over this entire list. Again, feel free to cut and paste it, use it, import it in your Canvas shell. This is where it gets into the disciplinary actions. What is very interesting is this one here. This is Ed Code. So this is California Education Code. This is not the colleges. This is like the statewide position. And this says here that if you have a situation where a student is violating some of these rules of campus, then the instructor may actually order that student to be removed from that class and the next class meeting. I should say that in online class, I think we've been talking about, I'll have to clarify this, up to like a week removal from the class. I think the key on any of this is if you have questions, and again, I've been teaching at the college 20 years, I could not recite this to you verbatim. It's very, very lengthy. It's clearly getting into levels of hearings and expulsion and all sorts of things. If you have questions, two things you can do. I mean, if it's an online question, I can give you some tips on that. So go ahead and email me or send me a Canvas inbox message. If you have a department chair in the discipline that you're teaching in, connect with the department chair. He or she has likely dealt with this issue in the past. If you do not, if you're a program like, say, communication or philosophy where there isn't a full-time faculty member in that discipline, then you would talk to your academic dean. So I just want to mention that. But basically, you do have things you can do. And one of the things I think is important, in addition to listing policies like these, and once again, you can click at the bottom, download that PDF from the college catalog, and you can see the entirety of the policy listed here. It's very lengthy, which is great. This is something you want, a lengthy policy listed and contained in our documents, believe me. But you can certainly state what these policies are, and you can refer to everything to give yourself, again, that backing that I think is very important. And then the other thing I would recommend is, in addition to having these on your website, give your specific version of them. In other words, how are you going to deal with plagiarism? How are you going to deal with student conduct and some of these issues of diversity? Now, we certainly want everyone at the college to follow the same policies. These are what's laid out. These have been approved by our faculty or our board of trustees, our administration, and so forth. But you might have a specific way of dealing with things. For example, in my syllabus, I might say, if you post something that I deem to be offensive or problematic, I will give you an initial warning. After that initial warning, then I will do the next step, and that might be contact the dean or enact some policy related to student conduct violations. So I think it's very important just for you to lay that out on your page for all students to know. I think it should be very prominent. I think it should be an announcement as well. I like redundancy in Canvas classes. I don't like just one thing buried at the bottom of something. Obviously, if you have a module, and this is our sample resource class, this is not a full-fledged class by the typical standards, but if this were a full-fledged class and I had something very important like here embedded at the bottom of the page, it's unlikely the student's going to see that. So you have to really think strategically about laying this out for the purposes of your student to be able to see. An example of that, let me just go to my dashboard. Let me show you my race class from last quarter. I'm showing this one because it was a great class, and I really did a lot in terms of my foundations up at the beginning, saying, hey, just to let you know, here are the rules for the class. So for example, I created a video on sensitive topics and conversations. And the purpose of this video really was to lay out how to deal with controversy in the class. If you don't agree with someone, how do you approach that disagreement constructively? This, I think, really worked. I had some good views on this, and I found that students were very respectful. It's probably the best version of this class I've ever taught, just from the standpoint of how students were so respectful in the class. As you can see, I do a lot of foundational stuff at the beginning, getting started in the class, my class policies, and then a lot of introductions on how to do Canvas itself, using the app and so forth. This is another one I find useful. I created a recent class policies video, and this lays out a series of policies in the class. I basically walk the students through my class shell, and I talk about here's what's going to happen, and here's how you should approach it, and so forth. I think if you do that, it's a great opportunity to really communicate to the students up front what you expect from the class. The world of online teaching is sometimes an abyss. Sometimes students take a class, they're not independently motivated, they don't maybe look at everything they should look at, and you can always tell that by going to your course analytics, your activity reports, and so forth. And if students aren't looking at some of your videos or some of your shells, modules in the shells that lay out your policies or important procedures or whatever, you can then maybe do a quick announcement. You could do a quiz or a survey just to see if people are comprehending what you've laid out for them. We can have all the policies in the world that we want, but if we don't talk about those in multiple places in our Canvas shell, we really are, I think, missing out on an opportunity to educate our students about things like etiquette, things like sensitivity, and so forth. This is something I do in my classes. If you ever want an example of this, I could send it to you. It's my personal policy. I basically do not allow makeups for any work or for any circumstances except with a verified doctor's note. I really feel that this is important in an online class. We're not meeting in person, and we're typically doing things asynchronously. We're not doing things at the same time, which is great for the student and the instructor. But on the other hand, if we don't have deadlines and rules, I think then we lose out on some of those foundations of responsibility and commitment that many of us teach in our in-person classes. So I think it's quite important in my world to have this policy. I call it policy 1.1. It's my only policy. If you ever want a copy of that, just send me a note and I will send it over to you as an email or Word doc or whatever. Trying to see if there's anything else here. I do have my statement on plagiarism, academic integrity. I will be actually modifying that, updating it, making it a little stronger given the new inclusion I have in there. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. I also have a conduct code. This is something else I'll probably be updating over time, but it's something that I think is pretty important for me to lay out to students early on. And the rest of this is, yeah, that's just the schedule for the class. So that just takes the students through all the readings and videos and so forth. But I think the key is put it on your syllabus. In fact, on mine, to be critical of it, I probably need to have some of that more at the top. If you're doing a video about it, consider that as well. I'll do some videos on making videos in the future, so you can take a look at this. But I really feel like if you do more audiovisual representations of some of these issues like sensitive topics and conversations, you might be able to connect with your students at a more humanistic level, perhaps, than just a text or something like that. So I think that's it for this part. Let me jump into the next part, which just gives you some general tips about making some of this work for your students through some organization in your Canvas shell. All right, so in part 2 of this video, I will just take you through some quick tips on making these policies on plagiarism, academic integrity, and student conduct and tolerance in your DE class more meaningful to the student, hopefully more successful to you in terms of trying to achieve your goals in the class. Again, if you don't have a lot of controversial issues in your class, in your conversations, your discussions, this may not impact you particularly, but it's always, I think, good to know and have the stuff in your class just in case. I just added this to the DE resources, so I changed the title to main documents. Click on tips here, and these are some tips to think about. So in the previous part of this video, I talked about what the policies were. In this part, I want to just address the idea that we can all do some of these things to make our classes more successful. Again, I think it's an opportunity for all of us to act as instructors here at the college, whether we teach in person or online, or we're a full-time instructor, we're a DE instructor, a part-time instructor who teaches at a multiple number of institutions. It's an opportunity for all of us to participate in our community in terms of our community of colleagues as faculty members, as scholars, as instructors, and so forth. So here are some tips, 5 tips on how you might incorporate your plagiarism, academic dishonesty, and conduct intolerance policies in your class. As I said initially, include the policies as a part of your Canvas shell, perhaps in the syllabus, announcements, and modules. My personal viewpoint on this is to approach it through redundancy. I think if you have it in more places rather than less, the message hopefully will get out. Not every student will read click on every single tab in Canvas. So if you have it as an announcement, if you have it as part of your modules, if you have it as part of your discussion, maybe at the top of your discussion page as a link, it's very nice in Canvas that you can do hyperlinks within your Canvas shell. So you can have one page that you create on your policy for discussions and tolerance and how students should approach those, and then you can link that in multiple places via announcements, via modules, via the discussion board itself. So redundancy, I think, is also key. Secondly, detail and clearly state your own interpretations of the policies. For example, how will you handle the first issue when it arises in the class? I mentioned this earlier, I won't go back over this, but basically you should talk about relevant to the policies you're posting in your Canvas shell, how you interpret that, and how students need to come to understand your specific approaches and how you'll deal with issues. Again, if you set yourself as the authority figure in the class, I think you can nip it in the bud a little bit in terms of some of these issues. I think it's a proactive area we need to address as an institution as opposed to a reactive area. I'd like to see these issues get addressed, up front, and then save a lot of time for us in the future in case any of this goes to a dispute hearing or something like that. 3, consider creating a more human feel by communicating your own policies with a video or some multimedia form. It's perfectly fine to do it as an announcement, but I tend to think the more multimedia, video, interactive stuff that you can incorporate in your class in any number of areas, the better in terms of making that connection with students and letting them know a little bit that you're not trying to be punitive, you're not trying to accuse them of anything beforehand, you're just trying to be an authority in the class and let them know that it's important to follow your policies and to respect other students in the class and to not commit serious offenses like plagiarism and academic dishonesty, cheating, and so forth. Number 4, remember, if an issue related to these areas does make it to a dispute panel, you want to have more information rather than less in terms of those course foundations. So what happens if, I've had this happen in situations, I can't talk about them, obviously they're confidential, but if a student disputes a grade, if a student has a concern about how a particular issue is handled, then you want to make sure that you have essentially covered yourself in the sense of being fair to everybody. So if you have all that information clearly laid out in your Canvas shell, certainly on your syllabus, if the situation does make it to a dispute, a hearing, a conversation about something that happened in your class, you have those foundations. It makes it so much easier to address the issue, I would say in some cases more quickly, because we can look to see that, again, you had that redundancy, you had that information clearly laid out for your students in your class. 5th, if questions come up, reach out to your department chair if there is one, again, if it's a multi-person department with full-time faculty, or your dean if you're a one-person department, as well as your faculty colleagues. Like I said earlier, we're all available to help one another through some of these issues. If you, by the way, in spring quarter have tips for me, if you think of some ideas, send those my way. I could do another video, I can include them as part of the tip page, I can add to the resources here. I think that this LTCC Canvas and Online Users Group can be a really great place for all of us to have some conversations. Since we're all members, we can have some conversations about issues that come up in the class. As you can see here, communication, ideas, and sharing are all part of this, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to participate in our own development of community here at LTCC, regardless of our role at the college. So that's it for this video. I hope you had an opportunity to think about why it's important to have these policies communicated in your LTCC Canvas DE class. As other issues come up, just let me know. I'm happy to help serve you here as the DE coordinator in spring of 2019 here at Lake Tahoe Community College.